Sam Whitaker quietly bagged the groceries, slipped in a carton of milk and a box of cookies the children had been eyeing, and gently pushed the bag across the counter without saying a word. He didn't ask for thanks, didn't explain himself, but what could this simple act of kindness have triggered to bring the army to his doorstep? Find out on Courageous Voices. The next morning, 5 military trucks lined up outside his tiny store, soldiers in full dress uniform, standing at silent attention, and when the silver-haired general stepped out and crossed the sidewalk, the entire town held its breath. What had Sam Whitaker done to summon an army? Sam Whitaker wasn't the kind of man who needed attention. At 62 years old, he looked like someone who belonged behind a small-town grocery counter, plaid shirts, rolled sleeves, and a calm, steady presence. He walked with a quiet strength, the kind that doesn't demand to be noticed, but earns respect over time. Most people in the neighborhood just called him Mr. Sam. His store sat on the corner of Pine and Cedar in a forgotten pocket of town where most people counted every penny and stretched every gallon. You wouldn't find neon signs or slick advertisements on Sam's storefront, just a faded hand-painted sign above the door and a rusty bell that jingled gently whenever someone stepped inside. The aisles were narrow, the shelves old and uneven, but you could always find the basics: bread, canned goods, milk, and on good days, a few fresh apples in a basket by the counter. Sam had run the place for over 20 years. He opened early, closed late, and was known to keep the heat running through winter. Even if no one was buying, people came not just for the groceries, but for the sense of normalcy, of dignity. He never asked too many questions, never made anyone feel small, but the neighborhood around him had changed. Once a place filled with factory workers and young families, it had grown worn and tired. The factories had long since shut down, jobs were scarce, people did what they could to get by. Some worked odd jobs, others leaned on government checks, and a few simply disappeared. The sense of pride that had once filled the streets had faded, replaced by boarded-up windows in corners where hope felt out of reach. Still, there was a sense of community, tight-knit but cautious. Folks looked out for each other, but didn't easily open up to strangers. Trust was something earned slowly. Gossip traveled faster than truth, and small acts of kindness often went unnoticed, or worse, misunderstood. Yet through it all, Sam Whitaker remained the same. Rain or shine, he swept his front steps, stacked the milk crates, and greeted customers with a nod and a quiet morning. For some, he was a lifeline, a man who'd let the tab run a little long until the next check came in. For others, he was just the grocer, always there, always decent, always unshaken. People didn't know much about his past, he never talked about it. No pictures hung on the wall, no medals, no stories, just the store, the shelves, and that old radio that played country classics as he worked. To most, Sam was ordinary, but to those who paid attention, really paid attention, there was something deeper, a kind of quiet nobility, a stillness in his eyes that hinted at a life lived with purpose. A man who had seen the world, who had endured more than he let on, and who, despite it all, chose to serve his community, not with speeches or signs, but with a paper bag, a gentle nod, and a hand that never hesitated to help. Little did they know that quiet grocery store on Pine and Cedar was about to become the center of something much bigger. Can a single act of kindness change an entire town? Stay tuned to Courageous Voices to find out. It was late in the afternoon when the door creaked open, and the little bell above Sam's shop gave its familiar tired jingle. The golden light of the setting sun spilled through the dusty window, casting long, warm shadows across the worn linoleum floor. In stepped a young woman, no more than 30. Her coat was too thin for the crisp air, and her shoes had clearly seen better days. One child clung to each of her hands, a boy around 6, and a girl maybe 4. Their cheeks were wind-chapped, their eyes wide and silent. Sam looked up from where he'd been restocking cans of soup near the front. He gave them a small nod, not asking questions, not pressing, just offering the same quiet welcome he gave to everyone. The woman moved slowly down the aisle, her eyes scanning the shelves. She picked up a loaf of bread, set it gently into her basket, then a dozen eggs, a can of peaches. Each time she'd pause, take a breath, and then reach into her pocket to count the coins in her hand before choosing what to add or put back. The little girl's eyes landed on a box of cookies on the bottom shelf. She didn't say a word, but her gaze lingered, and she gave her brother's hand a gentle squeeze. At the counter, the woman placed her modest handful of items. Sam tallied it up the old-fashioned way, pen and notepad. 24.63, he said gently. She bit her lip, counting again, then again. I only have 18.75, she whispered, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Maybe just the bread and the eggs. Her hands moved to return the fruit, but Sam quietly reached for a paper bag and began placing the items inside: the bread, the eggs, the fruit, and without a word, the carton of milk and that very box of cookies the little girl had been eyeing. He folded the top neatly, pushed it across the counter, and looked her in the eyes. Ma'am, he said softly, we don't charge hunger prices here. She blinked, caught off guard. I can't accept this. You already did, he replied with a small smile. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, nodding with gratitude. "My husband just got discharged," she said quietly. "Army, been trying to find work, his mother's in the hospital, it's just been a lot." "You don't need to explain," Sam said, placing a gentle hand over hers. "For just a moment, take care of those little ones." She gathered her bags and her children, whispering a heartfelt thank you as she turned to leave, but behind them, a man waiting in line scowled and muttered loud enough for Sam to hear, "What is this? A grocery store or a charity shelter?" Sam said nothing. He simply lowered his eyes, picked up a rag, and wiped the counter in slow, familiar circles. Outside, the wind picked up, and the woman disappeared down the sidewalk, her children clutching the bag of kindness from a man they barely knew. By the time Sam locked up that evening, the chill had settled in for good. The wind swept through the alley behind the store, rattling the loose metal gutter and tugging gently at the corners of the old hand-painted sign. Sam stood alone in the quiet shop, the shelves half-stocked, the radio humming a Johnny Cash tune in the background. He turned off the lights one by one, the familiar rhythm of closing time, a comfort he didn't realize he relied on. But something felt different that night. He hadn't noticed the man in line earlier, the one with the expensive jacket, the phone always in his hand. That customer had filmed the entire exchange with the young mother and her children, zooming in on the bag, on Sam's face, and on the items, especially the box of cookies. An hour later, the video hit social media. The caption read, "Local store owner hands out groceries like candy. No wonder real businesses can't compete." Sadly, by morning, it had been shared hundreds of times, then thousands. The comment section was brutal. "This is why inflation's out of control. People just freeloading. He's inviting crime into the neighborhood. Watch his store get cleaned out next week." Amidst the noise, a few voices tried to defend him. "I've known Mr. Whitaker for 15 years, he's never turned away a hungry kid." But those comments were quickly drowned out by the outrage. Sam didn't have a smartphone. He only found out what happened when Missy, the high school senior who helped him stock shelves on weekends, came in with red eyes and told him, "It's bad, Mr. Sam, really bad. People are saying things, mean things." He just nodded. By noon, the effects were already showing. The usual stream of regulars slowed to a trickle. Some walked past without looking, and others crossed to the other side of the street entirely. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd come in every Monday for years to buy eggs and fresh tortillas, caught Sam's eye through the window, then turned away, pretending not to see him. The next morning, his bread delivery didn't arrive. When he called, the driver was sheepish. "Sam, I'm sorry, my boss saw the video and said, we can't be affiliated right now. Company image." "You know." Sam didn't argue. He just said, "Understood," and hung up. The store, once a place of quiet routine, now echoed with absence. The bell above the door barely jingled, the floorboards creaked louder than usual. Even the radio, now playing softly, seemed unsure if it should keep going. That evening, Sam walked to the front window and stared out at the street. He saw the same buildings, the same cracked pavement, the same tired lamppost, but something invisible had shifted. He reached beneath the counter and touched the bronze medal hidden among faded receipts and old family photos. He didn't look at it. He didn't have to, because Sam Whitaker wasn't shaken by loud voices or shifting crowds. He had seen harder days, and he knew that sometimes when you do the right thing, the world doesn't clap, it turns its back. But that never stopped him before, and it wouldn't start now. The days that followed were unusually quiet, not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the kind that settles in your bones, a silence that wraps around you like fog, soft on the outside, but cold beneath the skin. Sam Whitaker came in each morning at the same time as he had for 20 years. He flipped the sign to open, even though no one waited at the door. He brewed a fresh pot of coffee no one would drink and turned on the radio, though he didn't listen much to the music anymore. The usual clinks and clatters of daily life were replaced with the hollow sound of an empty store. He stocked the shelves slower these days, not because he was tired, but because there simply wasn't much left to restock. Deliveries had stopped from 2 suppliers, both citing public image concerns. One even left a voicemail that ended with "Nothing personal, but it always feels personal when the place you poured your life into begins to shrink around you." Sam didn't speak of it. He didn't complain. He didn't reach out to defend himself online. He didn't know how that world, the fast-talking, always connected one, had never been his. His world was simpler, full of small, honest moments. A woman's tired smile after finding enough change for flour, a boy clutching a peanut butter jar like it was gold, a neighbor asking how his tomatoes were growing. It was those things that kept him coming in long after the numbers stopped making sense. Some nights Sam would sit alone in the back office, surrounded by worn invoices and dusty jars of penny candy no one bought anymore. He'd stare at the old photograph tucked in the corner of his corkboard, 4 young men in desert fatigues, arms slung around each other, faces sunburned and grinning. One of them was him. His fingers would often reach into the small drawer beneath the desk where he kept the medal, not to admire it, not for validation, just to feel its shape, to remember. Somalia, 1993, the heat, the chaos, the moment he chose to stay behind, the hours that passed, the lives he held onto with threadbare hope and bloodied hands, the ones who made it home and the ones who didn't. He never told anyone, he never needed to. What mattered was that he Did what was right even when no one was watching, even when it didn't make the news, and here he was again, decades later, doing the same, quietly helping where he could, offering dignity instead of judgment, and yet, the world had changed. Now people wanted headlines, outrage, sides to take, but Sam Whitaker didn't belong to any side, he just belonged to the neighborhood. Even if the neighborhood had temporarily forgotten who he really was, as he turned off the lights one evening and stood in the darkened store, he whispered, not to the world but to himself, "You don't stop being who you were just because folks stop noticing," and with that, he closed the door behind him and walked home alone as he always had, steady, silent, and unshaken. The morning air was different, there was a tension hanging over the sleepy neighborhood, the kind that wakes you before your alarm, makes you pull the curtains back with a curious hand. At first, it was just a low rumble, barely noticeable, but it grew louder, deeper, a sound that didn't belong to delivery vans or garbage trucks. Sam had just flipped the sign to open when he heard it. He wiped his hands on a towel, walked around the counter, and looked out the front window. 5 massive military trucks rolled down Pine Street, one after another, their engines growling low like distant thunder. Neighbors stepped out onto their porches, phones appeared in hands, children abandoned their bicycles and skateboards, craning their necks for a better look. The trucks came to a slow, deliberate stop directly in front of Sam's store. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, heavy and full. Then the doors opened, men and women in full dress uniforms, crisp blues, polished metals catching the morning light, stepped down from the trucks, rows of them, silent, standing tall and proud. Sam stayed where he was, one hand resting lightly on the counter, the other gripping the edge, not in fear, but in quiet confusion. Across the street, Mrs. Rodriguez gasped audibly, others whispered, the kind of whisper that spreads faster than fire. Is this for him? What did he do? Are they here to shut him down? And then, cutting through the murmurs, one figure moved, a silver-haired general, his uniform weighed heavy with service and honor, stepped onto the cracked sidewalk and crossed the street, each step measured and full of meaning. He entered the store without hesitation, the doorbell jingled softly, absurdly out of place amidst the gravity of the moment. The general removed his cap and held it against his chest, his sharp eyes softened as they met Sam's. Without a word, he extended his hand. Sam, still uncertain, reached out and took it, and then, in front of everyone, the watching neighbors, the silent soldiers, the disbelieving onlookers, the general spoke in a voice that filled the small store. Chief Warrant Officer Sam Whitaker, you once stayed behind when others left, you risked everything to save men you barely knew, you honored a code few even remember anymore. The general paused, his voice thickening with emotion. Today, we are here to honor you. Outside, the street had fallen completely silent. Inside, time seemed to hold its breath. Sam blinked, the weight of memory pressing gently at the corners of his mind. He said nothing because nothing needed to be said. The men and women in uniform, one by one, raised their hands in a solemn salute toward the man behind the counter, a man who had simply been doing what was right yesterday, today, and all the years in between. The salute hung in the air like a prayer. Outside, the crowd that had once avoided the little grocery store now pressed closer, their faces a mix of awe, regret, and wonder. Children clutched their parents' hands, elderly neighbors who hadn't ventured out in months stood on shaky legs just to witness it, and slowly, as if some invisible wall had crumbled, the first neighbor stepped forward. It was Mrs. Rodriguez. She clutched a cloth-covered basket to her chest, her famous homemade empanadas, and with trembling hands, she crossed the street. Her eyes were wet as she entered the store, her voice breaking as she spoke. For your dinner, Mr. Sam, I'm sorry for yesterday. Sam took the basket with a small nod, offering her the kindest smile he could muster. Behind her came others, the town barber, still in his apron, scissors tucked into his pocket, the local mechanic with grease-stained hands, the school teacher carrying a hand-drawn card from her students that simply read, "Thank you for being a hero." Even the young men who once skated noisily past Sam's shop without a second glance now stood in a quiet line, each offering a handshake, a nod, or a whispered thank you. The man who had posted the hateful video arrived too. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped under the weight of shame. He held up his phone for everyone to see, opened the video, and deleted it in front of the crowd. No excuses, no speeches, just 3 hard words. I was wrong. Sam said nothing, simply offering a forgiving pat on the young man's shoulder, a gesture far louder than any lecture. By afternoon, the little store that had once felt abandoned was alive again, not with sales, Sam never cared about that, but with laughter, conversation, and the soft murmur of a community remembering who they were at their best. The local news crews arrived, drawn by the spectacle of military trucks and uniformed men and women, but when they asked for an interview, Sam simply shook his head. This isn't about me, he said quietly, it's about remembering what matters. Before the sun set, the silver-haired general returned. In his arms, he carried a neatly folded American flag, a symbol of service, sacrifice, and belonging. He presented it to Sam with formal dignity, their hands meeting in a gesture of respect that needed no words. Sam accepted it, his throat tight, his heart full, not for the flag alone, but for the memories it held and the new ones being written today. Outside, the trucks remained, their presence a quiet monument to a simple truth. In a world too quick to forget, sometimes all it takes is one man, steady, humble, and true, to remind us what honor really looks like. As the sun dipped low behind the rooftops of Pine Street, a soft golden haze blanketed the small town. The crowd outside Sam Whitaker's store had thinned, but the feeling left behind lingered, a mix of reverence, gratitude, and quiet reflection. Sam remained inside, standing behind the counter, facsimile of the cover of the book The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. Sam remained inside, standing behind the counter where he had spent countless years. His hands, still strong despite their age, gently set the folded American flag on a shelf behind him, next to the old bronze medal that had stayed hidden for so long. He looked around the store, the scuffed floors, the crooked shelves, the dusty jars of candy that no one ever really bought anymore, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to smile, not a big, boastful grin, but a small, peaceful smile that came from deep within. He hadn't asked for it today, he hadn't asked for anything, really. Sam had lived his life by a simple creed: do the right thing even when no one's watching. And though the world outside his door had changed, faster, louder, sometimes crueler, Sam hadn't. When the last soldier saluted and the final neighbor offered their thanks, Sam quietly flipped the sign on the door from open to closed. But this time, it wasn't just for the day, it was a closing of a chapter. He knew things would never quite be the same, not for him, not for the town, maybe, just maybe, not even for the world, at least the small corner of it that he had touched. As he walked the familiar 3 blocks back to his modest apartment above the laundromat, the crisp night air filled his lungs, children still played in the distance, porch lights flickered on. Life, beautiful in its simplicity, continued. Sam paused at the steps, his hand resting on the railing. From the pocket of his worn jacket, he pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper, the thank you card one of the children had given him earlier. It read simply, "I want to grow up to be like you." Sam chuckled softly, folding the note and slipping it safely back into his jacket. He didn't need headlines, he didn't need applause, he had something far greater. He had lived a life that mattered, not because of grand gestures, but because of countless small ones, quiet, steady, and true. And in a world so often hungry for noise, Sam Whitaker remained a man of action whose silence spoke louder than any words ever could. In today's fast-moving world, it's easy to forget that the strongest acts of courage aren't always loud. Sometimes real heroism looks like a man quietly sliding a bag of groceries across a counter, expecting nothing in return. Sam Whitaker's story reminds us that dignity, kindness, and honor never go out of style. Even when the world around us seems to have lost its way, it reminds us that doing the right thing isn't about recognition or applause, it's about holding on to who we are, even when no one's watching and even when it's hard to. Today, in a society that often rewards the loudest voices and overlooks the quiet helpers, we need more Sam Whitakers, people who live their values every day without needing the world to notice. It makes you wonder, how many quiet heroes are living among us right now, unseen and uncelebrated? Have we become too quick to judge and too slow to understand? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever met someone like Sam? Or maybe you've had a moment where a small act of kindness changed everything for you. Please share your stories or reflections in the comments below. Your voice matters. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story that reminds us of the goodness still alive in the world. On Courageous Voices, thank you for spending this time with us, and remember, kindness is never wasted.